All right, folks, welcome back to another episode of the For the Cat podcast. In this episode, we're going to be hitting the Warriors versus Timberwolves game where we were able to win in a defensive fashion, which is, it hasn't been common the last few games because in the last few games, we were able to hang up 140, 130, 120 something points. Us being a defensive team, we usually can't score because we don't have a strong offensive identity. Albeit we have Steph, however, everything beyond Steph hasn't been great through the large sample this season. However, defensively, we've consistently remained at the top, but in the last few games, we've been letting teams score a little too much. And for us to hold a team that I felt like had our number for the last few years, to hold them under 100 points, that's big. That's big. I mean, even though there were some inconsistencies defensively, through the grand scheme of things, we did our job and we were able to hold them to 85 points. So I guess we can start with the defense. So I thought Steve Kerr starting Al Horford was a genius coaching move. And the reason why is because when you look at Minnesota and how they match up against us, Ant-Man is the best player on that team. And Ant-Man, he has the potential in being a top 5 player in the league. He probably is already there, but he has the potential to go even further. He could be in the same conversation as Nikola Jokic, Shea, and Luka Doncic if he can really get to that level. However, stylistically, he's not actually as bad of a matchup for us than a guy like Julius Randle. If you watch the last matchup and the playoffs last year where we played them in the second round, Julius Randle is He's a much worse matchup for the Warriors because Julius Randle, if you see the way he's built, he's a powerhouse. He's a bull in a china shop. He likes to go through guys. He likes to use his physicality. And against a guy like Draymond Green, for an example, Draymond, he has the frame and the stature to match up with Julius Randle, but Julius Randle, for whatever reason, just does not respect Draymond as a defender. He's gone at Draymond multiple times on multiple games, and it just feels like Draymond, as good of a defender as he is, as big and as strong as he is, he just can't wall off Julius Randle. And, whenever they play the Minnesota Timberwolves, they always have Draymond, who usually plays center, to guard Julius Randle. And they'll have, for an example, Jimmy Butler guard Rudy Gobert, because Rudy Gobert is a non-factor on offense. However, starting Al Horford at center and putting him on Julius Randle was a genius coaching move because Julius Randle, he really got dissuaded in this game when it came to isolation scoring because he's not going to go at old man Al Horford. Al Horford, although he's old, he's got that old man strength. He's 40 years old, but he's built like one of those old dudes at the YMCA where you just can't move him. And he's still a very good defender, being, again, at the age of 40. So Julius Randle had very little possessions where he went at Al Horford. I think he only went at him one time where he drove left and then spun over his left shoulder for like a little, I think like 7-foot fader. But other than that, he did not look to even attack Al Horford for more than one possession. Whereas when other people were guarding him, like for an example, Draymond, he was actually more intrigued to go at Draymond, at Guy Santos, at Quentin Post than at Al Horford. And then, as a team, I thought the Warriors did a good job getting into the passing lanes. Like we forced how many turnovers? Like 20 something. And, a lot of it did come from Minnesota and their disconnect on offense. However, I think we did our job rotating and jumping passing lanes, especially some of the guards. Like they were able to read passes before they even happened. And that's a big thing because the Warriors, again, they don't have the personnel to compensate for their mistakes. So if they can think one step ahead and create turnovers and play off of it, and which we'll talk about in a minute, that's a huge thing. But to go back to what I said earlier about Minnesota's disconnectivity, a lot of the turnovers that they had, it felt like those turnovers were really reminiscent of how we would turn the ball over. Like, I was watching the game, just looking at the way they turned the ball over, and all I was just thinking was like, it feels like these turnovers are turnovers that we should make. Or rather, I should say Draymond would make. Because, you know, a lot of the passes that they were throwing, their players just weren't even ready to catch the ball. It was like they were thinking, that one guy was thinking one step ahead and another guy just wasn't on the same page. Like there was a lot of pick and roll actions where Ant was coming off the screen and he was getting ready to get off the ball and pass it to Rudy or skip it to the corner or whatever. And it just seems like they just weren't ready to catch the ball. Like they didn't see the ball early. And then in transition, it was even worse because they would try to kick the ball up ahead quick. But again, guys just weren't ready for it. It just seems like they weren't ready to play fast. And, you know, I don't know their schedule. I don't know if they played last night or if they didn't play for a couple of days. But it just seems like, you know, them as a team, as a unit, they just weren't on the same page, which played into our favor because, you know, it allowed us to get out in transition, to which we don't usually get out in transition a whole lot. And it really benefited our scoring. And then I want to shout out guys like Guy Santos and QP because they did a good job like walling up some of the bigger players as well when they were getting to the rim for Minnesota. So like guys like Naz Reid, he was trying to get to the rim. He was trying to crash the glass. And Guy and QP actually did a very good job physically underneath the basket to hold them off so they wouldn't get easy putbacks or like easy drives to the rim. And, you know, historically, whenever Guy and sometimes QP as well, like QP last time when we matched up against the Minnesota Timberwolves, I think he got dunked on like 3 different times by Rudy. So, you know, there's a physical element that Minnesota brings whenever they play us. And it just seems like in the previous matchups, we weren't able to deal with that. But in this game, we dealt with that much better. Guy did a very good job, like holding his line and just staying squared, staying vertical, and not really committing a whole lot of fouls, besides one that actually didn't get called against Anthony Edwards. But besides that, they did a good job not allowing Minnesota to get, you know, points off the margins. So like second chance points, things of that nature, points off turnovers. They did a very good job. And, you know, their production isn't going to scream, you know, impact on the box score. However, if you watch the games, you'll see how much of an impact they really have on the floor. And yeah, I mean, that's all I have for the defense. I just felt like, you know, it was a mixture of us doing everything that we needed to do and also Minnesota handing us a lot of opportunities that we likely shouldn't have gotten if they were all on the same page, essentially. But let's talk about some of the inconsistencies with the defense, despite it being an overall good performance. So Ant-Man went off for 20 at halftime, and he ended the game with almost 30. And a lot of the shots that he was hitting was long range, tough contested pull-ups that a lot of our guards just can't contain. I mean, Ant-Man, you know, he's an interesting player because he's such a good athlete. And coming into the league, he was known as this guy that consistently got downhill, and he wasn't a jump shooter. But ever since the 2024 playoffs, he's transformed into this elite off the dribble shooter that no one can seem to stop. He has such a great elevation on his jumper. He's got a good high release type of set point. And it seems like you need a very long athletic type of matchup to really stay with Anthony Edwards because, you know, our guards, some guards on our team, they can be quick on the ball, but a majority of them, they're just not good athletes. They're not big enough, and Ant can just shoot over the top of them, and there was just nothing that we could do. Without him, we would have won this game by 50 because the type of shot making that he was displaying in the first half, it ultimately kept Minnesota in the game. And the primary matchup for Anthony Edwards was Moses Moody and GP2. Both of those guys were getting fried because Moses Moody, we already know he can't stay in front of nobody. And GP2, he can't move, he can't jump, he's not as athletic as he once was. So Ant-Man, you know, he got to cooking. However, you know, when I watch Ant-Man play, when I watch him score the basketball, I'm thinking he has the potential to be the best player in the world, which is, you know, it can sound crazy at times, but, you know, when you actually look at the way he approaches the game, it's not out of the realm of possibility. However, I think there's two things Ant-Man needs to change in his game, or not change, but improve in his game in order to be in the same conversations as some of the best players in the world. So for me, I just want him to be like an apex playmaker because he can score the basketball, especially as a jump shooter, at a high level. However, his ability to dissect defenses with his playmaking is still a work in progress. Like, I want him to be a good passer out of the pick and roll, being able to make the pocket pass, being able to get the ball to the roller, a lob passer, a person that can skip the ball across the floor, somebody that can get off the ball quickly when he realizes that a double is coming. And he just hasn't been able to reach that like top level when it comes to playmaking. Like, he has improved in little steps. Like, I thought against the Lakers in the playoffs last year, he was good, but he wasn't great. So if he can really take that next step as a playmaker, I think the sky's the limit for him. And then on top of that, earlier I mentioned how Ant has this gift of getting downhill, but he leans more into being a jump shooter. So he takes a lot of pull-up threes, a lot of pull-up twos, but his like in between scoring, the short paint scoring rather, the area where you take shots from like 5 to 10 feet, he's not really good in that area. The area where you would shoot like floaters and hook shots, all that type of stuff. He needs to work on that part of his game because we know he can get all the way to the rim. He's a good jump shooter. He has the ability to get to any spot on the floor. He just needs to make sure he has the touch around the basket. And I think once he gets that, down in his game, he's going to be in that same conversation as, Shea and Luka. And, at that point, it's not only going to be good for him, but also for the league because, personality wise, he has it. A lot of people love him. And, there's just there's no other player, no other young player in the league that would suit the responsibility of being the face of the league. So that's that. And then Dante DiVincenzo, I don't know what it is. What does Dante have against the Warriors? Because ever since like the playoffs last year, he just goes crazy against the Warriors. I just don't know why, because I don't know. It's just crazy. But if you just watch the game, I think part of the reason why is because Moses Moody, he just cannot stay in front of nobody. Like Dante, he fries Moody every single time we play him. Every single time he comes off a pin down, Moody's supposed to stay with Dante. Like there was a possession in the first half where Dante was in the corner, Moody was guarding him in the right corner, and I think Julius Randle was trying to set him a pin down, and Guy Santos was guarding Julius Randle. And when Dante was coming off the pin down, Moses Moody died on the screen, and he gave Dante like 2 feet of separation, and Guy Santos was like trying to, stay with Julius Randle. He didn't want to switch. He gave Dante literally like 2 seconds to get his shot off. And to me, like when I watched that, I was there like, that just shows everything that's wrong with Moses Moody and his defense, because Moody, he can't guard on the ball and he can't guard off the ball either. So, I just don't understand how he has this reputation of being a defender. Like, I'm questioning, like, in college, was he even a good defender? Or did they just see that he averaged a ton of steals and just thought that he could guard when in reality he can't? Because, like, there's just no resistance from him as a defender. Like, he can make defensive plays all he wants, but it's not going to fool my perception of who he is as a defender, which is a below average defender. I don't care if he has long arms. I don't care if he has a good build. He can't guard anybody. Offensively, he did his job. Sure, he made shots, but besides that, like, he can't even stop a guy like Dante. And Dante, he was getting everything that he wanted. So, yeah, defensively, that's all I have. I mean, I thought a good collective defensive effort, just some inconsistencies from our guards that led to Minnesota and their backcourt to really get going. But to shift it over to the offense now, I thought this team really flashed a ton of good potential in this game as a transition offense, because they don't normally get out in transition. This team, like, when you see how they play offense, obviously they play that motion style offense, but they shoot a lot of threes. And when you see that they're like they're one of the top shooting teams in the league in terms of volume, you would think that like, oh, they want to take a lot of threes because they want to, but in reality, they take a lot of threes because that's the only thing that they can do. It's not because they want to, it's because that's the only thing that they can do. And when you're a jump shooting team that only relies on threes, in transition, it's hard to really be a good transition team because you don't have anybody that can attack the rim. So many of these guys just push the ball in transition, but they don't look to get all the way to the rim. They don't look to get an early paint touch. So because of that, guys that are shooters on the team, they can't get clean looks. However, in this game, I thought we got a lot of good leak outs. That was big. Pods got a couple leak outs. I thought Will Richard also got, I think he got one leak out. And then everyone else just looked to push the ball and just run their lanes, just run straight into the corner and have somebody just push the ball. And we got a lot of free points. But even though we looked to get out in transition, I thought we could have done better in transition, because we've only had 22 points in transition, but we really should have had 30 something, because, to force 20 turnovers from the Minnesota Timberwolves and you only score 22 points off of turnovers, that seems like, you're selling yourself short. You should have done better. And I think this team, without a secondary star right now, should 100% lean into that personnel, because you're not going to be able to create anything in the half court besides Steph Curry. Steph Curry's your only shot creator on the team. Or actually, I take that back. I'm going to touch on this later on. However, in the half court, they're not going to be a great half court team, especially a half court offense. So they need to look to get out in transition and get easy scoring opportunities, or else things are going to fall apart easily. And then on top of that, Steph Curry is your only shot creator on the team, but some of the work that D'Anthony Melli was doing on the ball today was incredible. That hezzy that he had on Rudy Gobert, that's an elite move, like an elite shot creation move. No other player on our team can bring that type of creation other than Steph. Melli has this underrated off the dribble pop to where he can consistently break the paint and get all the way to the rim. And a lot of guys, a lot of good defenders that we've played in the last few games, they can't stay in front of him. They can't. So because of that, if you combine that with his ability to shoot the ball, he can sell the threat of his shot and even make his driving game more dangerous. Role players don't usually do Rudy Gobert the way that he just did him. So the fact that he can pull that off against a top defender like Rudy, it speaks volumes about how good of a player Melli is. Now, I don't think Melli is good enough to where he can all of a sudden insert himself as the secondary shot creator on this team, because, he's coming off an ACL tear, and, as good as he is, he's not that good, right? So I think he's overachieving, which obviously Warrior fans can absolutely accept that. However, this team needs a secondary shot creator, because if we don't have any secondary shot creation, the non-Steph lineups, they're going to be in trouble. Now today, it wasn't as big of an issue because Melli, he overachieved. And a lot of the bench guys, they played very well today. However, you're going to need somebody to anchor those guys, because none of those guys can lead the second unit for long. Like Melli, he can't do this for the rest of the season. So, with the level that Steph is playing at right now, you're going to need to get him some type of help. If not, we could lose games simply because Steph went to the bench, which is crazy, because that shows the discrepancy between Steph and everyone else on the team. Now, to shout out a couple of more players on the offensive end, I already touched on Moody. So Moody, he was able to run to the corner and make corner threes. And when you think about how easy his job is, I don't understand how he has games where he doesn't score over 10 points. I don't understand how he has games where he doesn't hit a single 3-point shot, because he has some of the easiest looks on this team as a shooter, and he still can't make shots. And on games where like he can't guard, and on top of that, he can't make shots, and when you combine both of that together, you start to question like, what is the difference between him and Buddy Hield? Because Buddy Hield, he's a fake shooter, and he can't guard, and when he can't do both of those things, he can't play. So if that's the case with Buddy, and it's also the case with Moody, you start to question like, Moody, he was a lottery pick, and he's in year 5. He's supposed to have like, years on years where he can improve. Where's the difference between him and a guy like Buddy Hield? So yeah, good on Moody for making the shots today, but I still don't really believe in his potential as a player. And then, to shift it over to Al Horford. Al Horford, he had a solid offensive game where not only did he shoot the ball well, I think, but he, him as a matchup threat against guards is it's an underrated thing, because, in the past, our front court players, they haven't been able to take advantage of certain matchups. So for an example, if you run pick and roll and a guard switches onto a center, we can't really throw the ball to the center because the center can't take advantage of that matchup. They're not that offensively skilled. However, Al Horford, being the player that he is, he was able to score on like 2 different possessions. And that's huge because, if you don't have that option available, you're forcing your guards to have to go at Minnesota's front court. And Minnesota's front court, they have a good defensive lineup. They have Naz Reid, Julius Randle, guys that can stay with guards, and it can be tough to score on them. However, if you just throw the ball to your center and your center can post up their guard, that's a much easier approach than to try to create against their front court. So good on Al Horford. And then Pods, he had an okay offensive game, or rather it was like because he had a couple of leak outs, but he continues to revert being to this like connector type of identity where he has no interest in taking the shots that the defense gives him, and he passes up a lot of shots. He like telegraphs his handoffs. It just becomes so easy to guard. And then when he does try to create, he has no type of success. That hook shot that he had against Naz Reid, he took a crazy hook shot against Naz Reid, and I don't think it even hit the rim. Like, that shot was so nasty that I was just there like, man, this guy's a funny player. So yeah, all in all, a solid offensive performance. It was impressive, combining it with the defensive performance as well. However, tomorrow we're going to see them again, and I think that's a scheduled loss because we're not going to have Melly, we're not going to have Al Horford, and if we don't have both of those guys, I mean, how are we going to win? TJD and Pat Spencer, they're likely gonna get minutes tomorrow, and they're not really going to do anything against Minnesota, I don't think. So, yeah, I mean, good on us to split the baseball series early. However, tomorrow, I think we're gonna have a Julius Randle legacy game. So, yeah. So now we're going to switch over to something new that I'm going to introduce to this podcast series that I'm doing, which is I'm going to speak a little bit about other news from other teams in the league. So pretty much, let's start with Giannis from the Bucks. So Giannis, I think he got a calf strain or something like that, and he's out for like 4 to 6 weeks. That's tough because obviously teams are gunning for him at the trade deadline. Like, he might not request a trade from Milwaukee, but teams know what the deal is, and they're getting ready to send, some of their best offers to Milwaukee to try to get Giannis, and the Warriors are included in that. So for him to get injured so close to the deadline like that, I don't think it's going to dissuade any teams from being potential buyers. However, for us, like, if we're going to, let's say we're going to get Giannis, right? To which I don't think is going to happen because our trade package is it's not going to be better than other teams in the league. However, Giannis, if we trade for Giannis and we happen to get him, we're going to need him to play as soon as possible, because if he's going to take his time, I mean, that can be like the difference between us making the play-in and not making the play-in. The West is so deep in the sense that like anybody can be anywhere in the standings, that if we just have like a bad 2-week stretch, we're essentially going to not have any chance to make it into the play-in. So Giannis being out, it hurts. It hurts a lot of teams that are going to, essentially put their bid on him. And the Bucks in general, they just have been, a bad team. Like, as bad as we've been, the Bucks arguably have been even worse. And even though, like I said earlier, Giannis has never formally asked for a trade, we know how he feels, right? He's one of those guys that's trying to be loyal, just like Steph. He wants to remain a Milwaukee for his entire career. However, in an era like this where guys switch teams like that, it's hard to not follow the trend, because guys are trying to do what's best for their career. And right now, Milwaukee, they haven't done a great job building a team around Giannis ever since Chris Middleton got injured, ever since they lost against the Heat in that 23 series. They haven't made moves to increase their roster around Giannis. They've brought in shooters around Giannis, and that like maximizes his rim pressure ability, because every single time he gets to the rim, guys are going to crash down. So ideally that's going to create good looks for the shooters on their team. However, because they have such a lack of athleticism and size on their team, it becomes an issue defensively, because Giannis, he can only do so much as a help side defender, but they don't have good enough athletes that can hold their own out in space. So yeah, I mean, I envision Giannis, being on the block, like secretly. They're probably not going to make it obvious. So I think teams, like, again, they're scheming. Like, it's not something that's clear, but I think they know what's going on. And then another thing that I would like to talk about, this is the last thing that I'm going to talk about, which is the Thunder are no longer eligible in beating the regular season record from the Warriors, because they've now lost 9 games, and if they lose any more games, they're not going to break the record. And it's crazy, because at the start of the season, the Thunder were going so crazy that everybody, or I shouldn't say everybody, but most people thought that the Thunder were going to be the team that's going to break it. And I couldn't believe it, because, I was a Warriors fan in 2016, and to just know that the Warriors lost only 9 games that season, it's just crazy. To know that now, like being the fan that I am now, it's just crazy to think about, because, 10 years ago in 2016, when I was a fan of the Warriors, I couldn't even remember a game where the Warriors lost. Like, they were so dominant that season that I could remember so many games where they won, but I can't remember the games where they lost. It's crazy. Like, even though they lost, it felt like they won because of how dominant they were. So, for the Thunder to be like at the beginning of the season to be on pace of potentially beating that record, it's crazy, man. For them to even have that type of trajectory at the beginning, it just speaks volumes about how good their start was. However, now that they lost 9 games, they're not going to break the record. However, they're still going to be a good team. Like, obviously, they're the best team in the West. They're going to be the gatekeeper to any other team that has any desires to make it to the NBA Finals. So, we also have to think about how San Antonio and how good of a team they were, because they handed the Oklahoma City Thunder 3 losses. I mean, out of those 9 losses, 3 of them were from the San Antonio Spurs. So credit to Victor Wembanyama, credit to the young players on the Spurs, because without those 3 losses, they still would be in contention right now. And, when you think about how good this roster is and how good the Warriors roster is, people try to debate which team is better. And although I do favor the Warriors, I don't think the matchup is as much of a mismatch as some people would make it out to be. Like, some people would think the Warriors would easily beat the Thunder, and I do think the Warriors would beat the Thunder. However, I don't think it's as much of, I don't think there's as much of a discrepancy as much as people would make it out to be. So yeah, that's all I have for this podcast. I wanted to introduce something new, just so it doesn't seem like I always talk about the Warriors. So yeah, thank you so much for tuning in. I'll have more coming soon. I have more content coming soon. Just working on a few things behind the scenes, and hopefully I'll get them out soon. So take care, everybody. Have a great day, and I'll see you in the next one.